Eu vou, então, rapidamente apresentar a professora Helena. Como eu já disse, é pesquisadora do Centro de Relações Internacionais, da FGV, do Rio. Ela também é pesquisadora do Center of International Studies da Universidade de Cambridge. Foi Visiting Fellow no Hellenic Observatory da London School of Economics. Visiting Scholar na Columbia University e New York University. Pesquisadora associada no Center for International Policy Research na University of Sheffield, e seu doutorado em Relações Internacionais. A sua área de pesquisa inclui teorias de integração europeia, política externa da União Europeia e políticas de migração. Eu me desculpo mais uma vez e agradeço a gentileza da professora Helena de iniciar os trabalhos e passo imediatamente a palavra à professora.
Obrigada, Letícia. I'll continue in English because this is an English-speaking panel and because my Portuguese is very bad. So my presentation today will be about the EU foreign policy beyond the Lisbon Treaty, that is the new EU foreign policy, and how the reevaluation, the reformulation of EU foreign policy after the signature and entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty in 2009 has caused conceptual reevaluations about theorizing European foreign policy, and also can cause some reflection about the role of actors and agendas and the way they are formulated and presented in a foreign policy that is different than most traditional foreign policies, in that it is not the foreign policy of a state, the traditional actor, foreign policy actor in the international system, but a foreign policy of a supranational actor, an actor that is thus composed of various states, which obviously changes the dynamics of foreign policy making. Excuse me, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, in beginning to think about this presentation, I wanted to avoid the traditional trap of, and the very standard way of beginning presentations about EU foreign policy, which is referring to the famous Kissinger question about whom should he call when he wants to talk to the European foreign policy makers. Obviously, I didn't avoid this trap since I am starting again with this question, but one thing that the Lisbon Treaty has tried to do, and one thing that the post-Lisbon era has tried to avoid in the making of European foreign policy, is not having a specific institution, a specific actor that is accountable for European foreign policy making. However, the Kissinger question is still relevant, as it is relevant to first of all, the major preoccupations about the making of EU foreign policy, that is, how does a supranational entity composed of states, a variety of institutions with overlapping competencies make its foreign policy? Which are the actors who are most influential in the formulation of the agenda, and which are the actors that implement this agenda? And who do partners in foreign policy making address when they need to engage with the European Union? Furthermore, the Kissinger question is relevant to two major approaches, which are not necessarily mutually exclusive, of theorizing and reflecting upon the EU foreign policy. These two approaches are the capability expectation gap and the approach of Europeanization of foreign policy, which I will briefly go into in the next slides. But the important thing to keep in mind is that with the introductions and the changes in European foreign policy brought about by the Lisbon Treaty, we have cause to reflect upon the implications of these two theoretical approaches and the ways in which they can be reevaluated and reconceptualized. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, the main question, the main Kissinger question, the who do I call question, is particularly relevant to actors and agendas. In fact, it is a very simple question about which actor sets the EU foreign policy agenda, and who or which actors carry out the agenda. Here, Kissinger identifies a problem that was, until the signature of the Lisbon Treaty, quite relevant. The problem of a lack of representation, which is generally acknowledged as the essence of the question of what European foreign policy is, but also the question of influence, i.e., whose ideas, whose values, goals, objectives, deriving from where are integrated into the agenda of European foreign policy, and a question of methods, strategy, and limitations of foreign policy, who defines the tools and the ways in which the EU will go about implementing its foreign policy, and where does the end of this foreign policy, where does the limit of this foreign policy come from? Again, a question of agendas and of actors. Next slide, please. The two theoretical, or rather conceptual, terms that I also referred to, the capabilities expectation gap and the concept of Europeanization, are also relevant to actors and agendas. In which way? Well, as most of you will know, the capabilities expectations gap, formulated by Hill in 1993, proposes the main, formulates and captures the main problem in the conceptualization and the challenges of EU foreign policy. The capabilities expectations gap, simply analyzed, refers to the fact that demands from influential insiders and outsiders, therefore from the EU itself, but also from partners engaging with the EU in the formulation of multilateral schemas and foreign policies. Yes? Oh,
because of the interpreters.
Okay.
They're struggling.
I am really sorry. So that the demands from the inside and from the outside, demands for money, for political assistance, for solutions, democracy, normative guidance, are much stronger and much bigger, and perhaps unable to be met by the EU's foreign policy capabilities, its decision-making structures, its institutional framework, its economic and operational resources. There is an identifiable gap, an identifiable problem in the capabilities meeting the expectations. This theory has been taken forward by a number of foreign policy analysts working on European Union foreign policy. And today I want to point out its relevance to actors and agendas. The agenda of a foreign policy actor can be defined in a way as the expectations that the actor has of itself in the international realm, and the expectations that outsiders have of this actor. In this case, this agenda, therefore these expectations, are too broad, too wide, or too ambitious. They are the expectations or the agenda expected of a global power. The problem, as Hill points out, is that the capabilities of the EU are not those of a global power. We could, in a way, think of the capabilities of the EU as the sum of actors that formulate the EU foreign policy and which apply the EU foreign policy. In this way, we would equate the capability expectations gap to an agenda-actor problem. And as in the area of capabilities, obviously, we would not only cite the actors within EU foreign policy, but also the resources. But actors are quite relevant in what Hill calls the problem of coordination and the problem of bureaucracy. There are so many actors involved in formulating EU foreign policy that the impossibility that the coordination and the coherence among them causes a problem of capabilities. This gap, in turn, explains the EU's own makeup as an international actor, which again brings us to a question of actors. In this kind of deconstruction, the capabilities expectation gap can be viewed as an agenda-actor problem. Next slide, please. Is this better? Please. A second quite relevant term in the analysis of European foreign policy is that of foreign policy Europeanization. It has been formulated by many and used by many, such as Ben Tonra or Ruben Wong, but also by Christopher Hill, which points out that it is not unrelated to the capabilities expectation gap, or at least not mutually exclusive. Now, the foreign policy, the Europeanization concept, again deals with actors, but this time it deals with the relationship between the EU as an actor and the member states within the EU as actors in their own right. And what's the proposal of Europeanization? The proposal of the Europeanization assumption is that the EU, being an actor on its own, brings about processes of foreign policy transformation on the national level. Therefore, actor preferences, policy styles, identities, and interests on the national level are reformulated or transformed by internalizing norms and expectations and ways of policy making from the EU level. In turn, and this is not mentioned on the slide, the Europeanization theory views this interaction between national level actor and European level actor as a bidirectional interaction. So in turn, it could also be said that the preferences of national member state actors within the EU also have an effect on the agenda formulation of the EU as a foreign policy actor. I've said the word actor and agendas a number of times, so the relevance of this way of approaching foreign policy and European foreign policy to agendas and actors is quite clear. But just to point it out, the main relevance, the points of relevance are the interaction between national and supranational actors, so states and the EU level in constant interaction, and the fact that the agenda is shaped by these interactions, agenda here including the objectives, but also the norms and the values and the ideas that underlie the way of making foreign policy. And as I've pointed out, Europeanization theory suggests that this formulation of the agenda through interaction of state and EU level can be made in all three top-down, bottom-up ways, but also horizontally through a process of value sharing, idea reconstruction among actors. The next. So keeping in mind these two issues, the two theories, capability expectation gap and Europeanization, I return briefly to the Lisbon Treaty and its answers to the Kissinger question. What did the Lisbon Treaty propose to do? It proposes to bring into the European level, European foreign policy, institutions which are also double as actors which represent the European foreign policy. It proposes to solve the problem of who represents, who speaks for European foreign policy by introducing a high representative of the Union for foreign affairs and security policy, Catherine Ashton. It proposes to give to endow the EU with a new diplomatic corps, the EU External Action Service, which has as an objective to assist the High Representative, therefore a new actor. And it also endows the EU with certain attributes that assist in its own, assist it to be an international actor in its own right, namely giving it legal personality. And facilitates certain points of international activeness by enabling structured multilateral, bilateral military cooperation between member states. Finally, it gives legitimacy to European foreign policy by empowering the main representation actor that represents representation and legitimacy, the European Parliament. It empowers the European Parliament by giving it the right to scrutinize bilateral agreements that the EU makes. Next slide, please. Now, what does this mean in terms of actorness within the EU foreign policy formulation framework? It means an empowered high representative, therefore an empowered foreign policy, Minister of External Relations of the EU, an empowered parliament, and an empowered, or at least new, diplomatic service. If we look at all that, what we can say is that what we could derive as an observation is that post-Lisbon Treaty, the EU resembles a state in its foreign policy competences more than ever before. It has a foreign minister, a diplomatic service, and a parliament which is able to scrutinize, is able to control, in a way, its foreign policy. So this has been, in a way, very simplified, the remedy of the Lisbon Treaty for the Kissinger question. But does this really mean that we can simplify it, that we can perceive the EU as a unitary actor in foreign relations nowadays? Does this mean we have a more comprehensible foreign policy of the European Union? Next slide, please. To answer this question, it's important to think of contemporary foreign policy analysis in terms of the foreign policy of states. There are two ways of viewing, well, very, very simplified again. There are two ways of perceiving the state as an actor in foreign policy and in proceeding into the foreign policy analysis of a state. The first is to perceive the state as a unitary actor. The other, suggested by Carlsson but by others as well, in 2008, is to perceive the state as an institutional structure within which and on behalf of which individual decision makers act. This is a more pluralistic view of the foreign policy analysis of the state, and it involves acknowledging the influence of actors beyond the government, beyond the state level, the influence of think tanks, the influence of mass media, the influence of lobbies, therefore perceiving the state as a system rather than as a unitary actor.